Hi, welcome back to the podcast. Today we have a very special guest on. Today we have on First Sergeant E from the IDF who fought in Gaza following the horrific attacks on October 7th by Hamas. Sergeant E, it's great to have you on. Thanks for coming on.
Thanks for having me.
All right. So, we were just talking here and then we finally got the the episode rolling here. But what, like I said, we can just dive right into it. What was, basically, I mean, you can go over for the audience if you would like the kind of the what led up to the October 7th attacks. Like if you want to do a brief history of Israel, obviously, you don't have to spend a ton of time on it, or if you want to do an abbreviated version, would you want to do that for a bit of context?
Sure. So, you go back to the establishment of the State of Israel in 1948, and I think the historical context of wars throughout Israeli history also plays a pretty key role in what's going on today. So you look at the War of Independence in our War of Independence in 1948, in which on the same day that we declared our independence, a day after the British withdrawal from Israel, you had multiple Arab armies invade our country, a war we somehow won, and gained our independence over, essentially. And then you can look at 67 and 73, respectively, wars that caught by surprise, and no one thought we were going to be able to win. The Six-Day War being one of them, and you look at the First Lebanon War, Second Lebanon War, which pretty controversial wars in Israeli history, and then leading up to I don't know how to say the names of the operations in English, but the war in Gaza in 2014, which was technically considered an operation, not a war. But again, after the kidnapping of three Jewish Israeli teenagers in the West Bank, which led to more conflict and eventually the invasion of Gaza to destroy the tunnels. The tunnels that were tunneling from Gaza into Israel, and there's we live in a constant state of conflict, and at this point, we're used to it, but it's what happened on October 7th is something that's in something that has never happened in Israeli history, and it's considered to be the worst tragedy in Israeli history, and now we're looking at now we're trying to navigate our way through a response to such a horrific act.
And that was like I said, we the issues leading up to it, I mean, like you said, the fighting in you guys left Gaza back in 2006 or something like that, right? Because the Israelis had not been in there
2000
for
and
like
In 2005, we left the Gaza Strip. We pulled out 8,000 Jews from Gaza, forcibly removed them from their homes in an effort for peace. By 2007, Hamas had gained full control over the Gaza Strip, and essentially started killing off their political rivals, particularly Fatah, which is another group that has historically been responsible for terrorist attacks. They have a political wing and a military wing, similar to Hamas. But Hamas slaughtered their political rivals and took complete control over the Gaza Strip. And ever since 2007, we've been we started the blockade on Gaza, and we've been in constant state of conflict with them ever since.
And so I think that was kind of, I don't want to say that the Israelis, were complacent, but is that kind of a little bit what people are feeling after the October 7th attacks. You know, like the administration said, everything's safe, everything's good. And then, you know, this basically this massive attack happens. What was that feeling in like in Israel, but like before that, you know, you guys weren't in the Gaza. You're just kind of like, hey, it's there. There's a lot of people like trying to make peace. Like you've said before, there was a lot of political upheaval happening, protests and stuff in the streets. Like, what was that atmosphere like pre October 7th?
Sure. So there's kind of two sides to it. One, there's the conflict with Hamas, and then there is the Israeli want to even efforts to help the people of Gaza. So on one hand, you've got rockets coming in from Gaza once, twice a year, for a couple of days or even a couple of weeks. And then we airstrike where the rockets come from, and then it calms down after a while, and that's just become kind of um, the norm over the past 17 years. You look at what happened in 2000 in May of 2022. I think the operation was called Guardians of the Wall, and thousands of rockets were fired from by Hamas into Israel, and we had an airstrike campaign in Gaza against Hamas. On the flip side of that, you have a lot of people in Israel that feel bad for the people of Gaza. We understand that they're living under complete and utter control by a terrorist organization that does not a whole lot for their people other than stealing the massive amount of foreign aid that they get. So the feeling before October 7th was essentially trying to find a way to survive with the status quo. I think the vast majority of Israelis had kind of made up with the fact that this was going to be the situation for a while, that every year or 6 months we would get some rockets fired at us, we would airstrike them back, and we would live with it. But after October 7th, the vast majority of Israelis don't see a way forward other than to destroy Hamas completely, and to not have to live under such conditions, where you're essentially just conditioned to be okay with having rockets fired at you and your family every couple of months.
Mm-hmm. Well, as like I said, that's, you know, especially after the attacks on October 7th, like I said, you guys have been living like that, and it's always trying to appease the enemy, even though they keep striking at you. And I feel, you know, that's obviously a big point of contention now, even in the international community. I mean, the U.S., it's a big political point, you know, in our Congress and, you know, and even in our culture, the support of Israel, you know, and you saw what happened. And then you guys go into Gaza and you see the tunnel systems. I mean, like I said, I imagine it's frustrating because you're trying to solve a problem that feels like can't be solved. You know, and I don't want to say in a humane way, but like at the end of the day too, like you got to protect your own, you know, and you now you have all the Arab states backing Hamas and, you know, making moves, and, you know, I imagine that's got to be pretty frustrating.
Sure. So a couple of points I want to touch on there.
Mm-hmm.
In terms of the other Arab states, the whole world has come down on Israel, obviously,
Mm-hmm.
um, saying, well, it's not a reasonable response, and look at the humanitarian crisis. Um, and lots of people are talking. The Arab states speak a lot about it, but something that I hope people are able to look into a bit more is what the Arab states actually do for the people of Gaza and Palestinians as a whole. Um, if you look at, there's a conveniently forgotten border that exists with Egypt, that the vast majority of the world kind of forgets to acknowledge, I guess. People always talking about open air prison in Gaza, yet there's a border that Israel doesn't control, which is the border with Egypt, and the Egyptians want nothing to do with the Palestinians. They're scared of terrorism spreading into the Sinai and into their own country. They have repeatedly stated that if Palestinians come close to their border and try to come through, that they will be shot and killed. They've rolled tanks up to the border, and they've refused to allow Gazans in unless they have some sort of a foreign passport or an Egyptian passport. In which case they take, I believe it's a couple of $1,000 per person, which Gaza being one of the lowest GDP places in the world, very few people have the ability to do. On top of that, you have countries like Jordan, which have come out on the international scene and said, well, there's a genocide going on. But if you look at what they're doing to Palestinians in their own country, where Palestinians live as not even second-class citizens. So there's been a lot of talk from the international community about what's going on, but my belief is that Palestinians only help the Arab world if they're suffering, and that the rest of the Arab world kind of doesn't want anything to happen, because it only helps their cause if Palestinians are still suffering. So coming to some sort of an agreement, a peace agreement, doesn't serve the other country's interests.
Before we keep going with the podcast, I want to drop this week's discount code for 9line Apparel. We're not just a brand, we're a lifestyle that celebrates the spirit of freedom, courage, and American values. Go check out our gear, including hoodies, glassware, flags, jackets, hats, patches, and much more. All material is ethically sourced, so every shirt you buy is free of slave labor. As a veteran-owned and operated company, we also take pride in giving back to those who served. Your purchase helped us contribute to charitable initiatives supporting veterans and first responders. This episode's discount is IDF20 for 20% off 9line Apparel products. I say again, IDF20. IDF20. Not 10, not 15, 20%. Not 25, because that's a bit excessive. So get over to the store and get yourself 20% off your next purchase. While you're at it, like, listen, and subscribe to the 9line podcast for future discounts and more conversations with amazing guests like today. Now back to the podcast.
Yeah, like I said, that's what we've been hearing too. I mean, like I said, I know a little bit about the region, but obviously within the last few months, everyone starts coming out the woodwork and having their opinions. But then it's also like I know enough about the region because I studied it when I was doing my intelligence degree, kind of what's going on. And yeah, you start seeing that where it's like the Jordanians don't want to take them in because they think they'll overthrow them. They had an issue in Lebanon where was that correct? And that they take in a bunch of, I don't know if it was Palestinians, but Lebanon had issues once they, that was the Lebanese war, taking in refugees and then kind of overtaking the country. And then you also have the Egyptians are like, yeah, we don't fucking want any of them, but yet they're screaming to high heaven, you got to help these people. You got to do this, but they don't do that themselves.
Yeah. So other than sending Hamas money, which if you look at where that money goes, how is it that with supposedly one of the poorest places in the world, you have the leaders of the Hamas political party being worth respectively $4 and $5 billion. Khalid Mashal,
insane. Yeah.
Khalid Mashal, and they're sitting in Qatar. I think they've recently fled from Qatar, but sitting in Qatar with private planes and so on, while the rest of their people suffer. And then the suffering of their people is now dumped on the same people that Hamas is attacking.
Mm-hmm. And so we can kind of get back to what happened on October 7th. Where were you when it all happened?
I was in Los Angeles. I was on my phone, and we have a an app in Israel that essentially gives you an alert whenever there's rockets fired.
Mm-hmm.
It's called Red Alert, and I see three notifications on my phone, and it rings. It has a ringtone that goes off when it happens, and I open and it says where it is, and I see I think it was near and a couple of the other. It says the rockets were being fired at a couple of the kibbutzim in the Gaza envelope, the area surrounding Gaza. And of course, it's always concerning, but I kind of immediately chalked it up to, it happens. It happens every couple of months, and usually it's a couple of rockets. It goes on for a couple of days. They send rockets, and we airstrike, and then eventually it calms down. So I see three notifications, and then about 30 seconds later, my phone just kind of explodes with notifications, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of notifications. And I'm opening the app, and I can see just everywhere that a rocket is being fired to, there's a red dot on the app, and it's just full. And so I call my brother, who was in Israel at the time, and I asked him if he's okay. He was in Tel Aviv, and I asked him if there'd been any sirens. He said no, not in our area, and kind of no one, obviously there was concern, but no one knew. People just chalked it up to, it happens. It happens. It wasn't. No one really thought much of it in the beginning, and then probably 30 minutes to an hour later, you start seeing the videos coming out of Hamas terrorists, in their white pickup trucks crossing the border, which is something that doesn't happen, and that's when kind of I realized that something serious is happening, and then slowly. Not so slowly, actually. You start seeing more videos coming out of terrorists in major cities in southern Israel, in Sderot and in Ofakim, just riding around on these pickup trucks with RPGs and so on, and that's when I realized that the shit had really hit the fan.
Mm-hmm. And so what were then the days following? Obviously we were all seeing it play out, and then all the videos on Twitter and just, how crazy and horrific it was. Like, what was that for you guys then? Like, what was that feeling? Because I imagine, like you said, it's like for us, we had 9/11, for you guys, it's like October 7th. Like, what was that feeling of, like, were you calling everybody like, let's go fuck some people up? Like, what was the overall, like, we got to get back, we got to do something? What was that feeling like in the hours and days, after the attack?
In the hours and days after the attack, no one understood the full scope of what had happened, or at least the general public didn't.
Mm-hmm.
The first report that came out was 20 or 30 Israelis had been murdered, and slowly the numbers started to rise, and eventually it got to, within a couple of days or within a week, probably it had gotten up to 1,200, and everyone was in a complete and utter shock, and the tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of soldiers were mobilized within a pretty short period of time, within 48 hours. Vast majority of my friends that were in Israel were immediately called on the 7th or 8th of October, were called up to reserve duty, and either went north towards the border with Lebanon, or south towards the border of Gaza. And more than anything, it was just a state of shock and kind of state of not knowing what's going to happen.
Mm-hmm.
That was the biggest thing. Is no one really knew what had happened, and no one knew what was going on and what was going to happen. So there was a lot of discourse going on about what do we do, what do we do. But it seemed, particularly in the beginning, it was just it was chaos.
Mm-hmm. So when did that rally feeling, like when did you and your, we had kind of, I talked to Nick Laidlaw over at Battles and Beers, and he managed to make some connections and get on a plane that was I think chartered just specifically for Israelis to get from the U.S. to back to Israel. When did that kind of start hitting for you? It was like, all right, we're getting on planes and we're heading back. Like, when did you guys get that
Um,
call up?
Within a couple of hours, as soon as I started seeing, the videos coming out and understanding just a fraction of what was really going on, my immediate thought was, how do I get back to Israel as soon as possible? And of course, all the flights were cancelled, and no one really knew what was going on. But very, very quickly, people started organizing flights back to Israel for reserve soldiers in particular. So I was able to get on one of those reserve flights within a couple of days, and I was back in Israel by the night of 10th of October, morning of 11th of October.
Mm-hmm. And what was that like then? Just hitting deck, like hitting back on, Israeli soil.
I'll be honest. From the 7th of October until I landed in Israel, I didn't sleep a single minute.
Mm-hmm.
And as soon as I got to Israel, I think I kind of understood even more um, how terrible the situation was. But I had some sort of a calming effect, essentially.
Mm-hmm.
The
Yeah.
more I learned, the worse it got. Um, but at the same time, being back on Israeli soil, I think it gave me kind of some feeling of control over what was going on, and didn't sleep much, but I was able to sleep, and knowing that I was there and that I was going to be able to go back and join my team, join my unit, um, gave me uh, a little bit of peace and a little bit of calm, knowing that I was actually going to be able to do something about it. And I think
Mm-hmm.
that feeling of, in Hebrew we call it chaser onim, lack of ability to respond, essentially helplessness, was really what I felt in the beginning, particularly until I landed into Israel. And then as soon as I landed in Israel, I felt like I got a little bit of control back.
Yeah. Yeah, I imagine that. I mean, it's I know how, like I said, a little bit to that extent, where when a firefight breaks out or natural disaster, until you do something about it, it feels like you are helpless. Like there's that feeling of like, well, what can I do? There's nothing I can do until you get into the fight or you get into, rescue operations or something, that you feel a lot better about the situation because you are helping at least control the chaos in a little bit, yeah, in a bit of a sense. So when you land and you're meeting back up with your family, what was, how did those days then leading up to, you know, basically the invasion of Gaza, like what was that like?
Um, somber, somber. Um, the whole country was just in shock and in a state of mourning, and I think that state of mourning kind of has never and will never go away after what happens. But I felt some of that starting to turn into um, a want to act and a need to act, and it went pretty quickly from shock and chaos to, you know, and anyone and everyone um, putting their hand putting their hand in to help, and to help soldiers, and organize combat gear, and organize everything that all the soldiers needed, and helping people get back to Israel. And so it was quite amazing to see, actually, um, that very, very quickly it went from complete chaos into complete shock to kind of the whole country being mobilized into helping and donating and organizing to help the soldiers.
Mm-hmm. So that's awesome. I mean, it's a terrible thing that happened, but it's great to see the country uniting. Like us back here, we were wondering what was happening just along with you guys. I mean, that was dominating the headlines. It was on everyone's minds just because it's such a horrific attack. And then it's like, what are, the Israelis going to do? Like, what's their next step? Because we obviously, got your guys' back. So, what are you going to do? We fought counterinsurgency for 20 years. I know you guys have as well through the years. When did you guys say, when did you get that word that was like the call up that like, hey, we're going in, this is what we're going to do?
Immediately, everyone, once we started understanding the full scale of what happened, everyone knew that we were going to go in. The question was really when. And, there was still some discourse about whether or not we're going to go in, but anyone that, had been in the military and has lived in Israel for a while understands the situation. Kind of everyone knew that we were going to go in. And there was constant talks about when, and the army didn't really announce anything. And as a soldier, I can tell you that you've probably experienced this in your time in the military, that you're supposed to leave for an operation and then it gets cancelled at the last second. They say, oh, we're going to do it tomorrow. And then tomorrow comes and, oh, we don't know. So everything was just really up in the air. And no one knew really when we were going to go in until we went in, because we were constantly being told we're going in. Oh, we're not going in. Tomorrow, in 2 days, in 3 days, whatever. And it kept on going backwards and forwards like that until we finally went in.
Yeah. So what was, I know we had talked previous about that. So then, we talked earlier, you're in the airborne probably about, I think you said from 2020 to 2022 or 2019 to 2021.
2019 to 2021.
Yeah. So you're pretty fresh out per se, and I don't want to give away too much of where you're at or what unit you were with, but when you got the call back to come back, what kind of feeling was that to be like, hey, we're about to breach, I'm about to basically do what I was trained to do? Like, was that kind of, I don't want to say was that exciting, but was that something like, holy shit, I'm going to actually do what I was trained to do?
Surreal, a surreal feeling. I'll tell you a story about a couple of my friends. I have a bunch of very, very close friends, and we're always together. And my friends were in Israel, sitting in one of their apartments until 4 a.m. on the morning of October 7th. And we joke all the time, we're going to go to war. And when's there going to be a war? When's there going to be a war? And there's kind of this saying in Israel, you can expect a war to happen every 7 years. And they were sitting there drinking beer, and one of them said, when are we going to go to war? We're going to go to war in the next couple of years. And throughout your whole military, you kind of laugh it off as a joke, but throughout your whole military, from the time you join the IDF, particularly as a combat soldier, until the time you finish, your commanders constantly tell you that you will go to war one day. You will go to war. And we don't know when it's going to catch us, but it will catch us at some point, and we will go to war. And you probably know how it is as a soldier. There are days when nothing happens. A lot of the time, nothing happens, and it's boring, and sometimes you even wish there was some action. So finally, it happens, and it's just surreal. I think that we humans as a species, we adapt very quickly to whatever situation we're in. But I don't think I fully understood and fully processed it until I was inside of Gaza.
Mm-hmm. And we talked about it before, but what was we'll jump right into it. What was that like crossing the line and getting into it?
Um, I can't say that I felt much. Can't say that I felt much. Um, I went in at night on a big open flatbed truck. Basically, imagine just a massive F-150 essentially, um, and I went in. I won't say where, but I went in through the fence in an area where, in my mandatory service in my first contract, I'd spent um, 7 months deployed there. So, going into Gaza from a place from part of the fence where I was responsible for 7 months of my service. Um, Also, kind of a surreal feeling, and all my service, you always, you never really think it's gonna happen. You you kind of know it will one day, but never really think it will, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
And going in, it was kind of a holy shit moment. But I think there was just so much going on, and I was so locked into what was going on, and the mission itself, that I didn't really feel. I kind of felt numb, to be honest.
Mm-hmm. So what was that like then? Like I said, getting in there, and then like so we had talked before, pulling the trigger for the first time. You said it was a bit chaotic. This fog of war really kicked up that first gunfight that you got into.
Yeah. So I joined a team because I got back on the 10th of October, 11th of October. The unit that I serve with um, was essentially full. It was 170% of 170% of those that were supposed to show up showed up. So people that weren't even supposed to be there showed up. People that hadn't showed up to reserve duty in a decade all of a sudden show up. So I had to find a new unit um, to fight with, because my unit told me wait at home. Unfortunately, people will get injured and people won't want to go back to Gaza after they get out the first time, and you'll replace one of them. So I didn't just want to sit at home and wait. So I found a new unit, and I didn't know anyone there, didn't know a single soul. So I go into Gaza and I meet my new team, sort of. I go in and some people say, "What's up?" I get to a massive villa, which they were operating out of, and I got there late at night, and kind of nothing happened until the next morning. I took out my sleeping pad and I put it on the ground. I went to sleep. I wake up in the morning. The commander of my platoon catches me for a 30-second conversation. He looks at me. He asks me where I served. I tell him the unit that I served in during my mandatory service, and he goes, "Okay, you're up front with me." And so um, I was put into his kind of squad, I guess, the squad of the commander of the platoon, which just means I'll be the first person in every room, and the first person um, kind of leading the rest of the platoon. Um, and So I speak to him for 30 seconds, pretty brief. Doesn't really ask me much, and he tells me, "You're with me, buddy," and he pats me on the back and says, "Good luck." And that was it. We went out that morning a couple of times to go to different houses next in our area of operation to go search for weapons and information. And we found some stuff. We dealt with that, and then they said, "Okay, we're going to go attack the city of Jabalia, which is a massive Hamas stronghold." And So we're on our way, and we went 300 meters out of the house. We hadn't even started heading to Jabalia yet. We were still on our way to the preparation area to then go and conduct the operation on Jabalia. And 300 meters in, two RPGs are shot at the platoon on the left of us. They're in a house. They get two RPGs. They scream for a medic. and the commander of my platoon kind of forgets that I'm there. Tank that's there operating with the platoon that got the 2 RPGs starts blowing out smoke to give us cover. And because I was in the very front of the battalion or platoon, I guess, me, the commander of the platoon, and the other person in his squad start getting covered in smoke. And he takes our medical team, runs into the building, and I guess because I was so fresh, he probably forgot that I existed, and he left me there. By the time I got out of the smoke, I cleared from the smoke. I looked back, and the rest of my battalion has grabbed some cover about 100 meters back, and I start getting shot at, and so I grabbed some cover pretty quickly, start returning fire, and I'm looking around, scanning for better cover because the cover I had was not ideal, and I see one guy that looks at the time looked to me to be injured. One of our guys, the head, the main sharpshooter for Team One, and so I run over him under fire. To go and I assumed he was injured, so I went to go deal with that and take care of him. And I realized he was just in shock. He had shell shock essentially. And so he didn't want to move, he didn't want to do anything. We have a pretty specific routine in the IDF that you're taught to conduct when someone's in shell shock. And so I started doing that. He wouldn't snap out of it. So I grabbed him by his vest, dragged him to about a meter and a bit high block of concrete left from the ruins of a building as cover. And I continued the fight from there. Eventually the fire stopped, and we regrouped and we continued. I'll be honest, I went up to the commander of my platoon and I cussed him out and said, "What the fuck was that? Why'd you leave me?" And he looks at me, he goes, "Are you alive?" I said, "Yeah, I'm alive." He goes, "Stop complaining, let's go." So,
yeah, typical. Yeah, right.
So, that was a bit of a slap to the face, kind of a rude awakening to war. But I believe in general that if you're gonna jump in head first. You know what I mean? So
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
that was kind of my first the first shots fired and my first real experience in Gaza.
What day was that? That was when did you guys do the push?
So with that team, I'd been in and out of Gaza before, conducting operations for a day at a time, and then leaving with a different special forces team. But that was my first with this team. It was my first kind of full scale venture into Gaza, where you're not going out of Gaza, you're staying in there for extended periods of time, for weeks at a time. Sorry, can you just repeat the question for me?
I was just saying. So when did you what was the date then? That was because I imagine that was like you said you were kind
So
of probing in and out.
that would have been in early December. I'd been in Gaza before that with a different special forces team, but yeah, conducting kind of day-long operations or 2-day operations and coming out. But that was mainly reconnaissance and as well as medical evac that I was doing before. So it wasn't as much combat, it was more med evac and reconnaissance. So that was what I just described happened in early December.
Early December. And then did you push in then for the next few weeks? They just went all out?
We pushed in for the next few weeks. So how it works, I won't go into it too much, but how it works is you're not always attacking. Sometimes you're going to be doing what's called defense of a house, essentially.
Yep.
Your team will pick a house. Lovely villas they have in Gaza, by the way. you pick a house or a couple of houses, and you board up you board everything up, and you create essentially a little base for yourself, and you operate out of there for a period of time. And then sometimes they'll give you a mission. Okay, you need to go to this neighborhood and conduct essentially search and destroy missions in that neighborhood, or we're looking for a very specific thing, but whatever. So we call it aganan kifa, defense and attack. So defense, you're going to be sitting in the house and you'll do little operations in that area, and you'll go out of the house every day. But attack will be, you have a specific objective to take over a specific area, and you're doing that, and that's constant motion. And then once you've completed that, you'll go back into defense for a bit. You'll pick a house and you'll go into defense for a while.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it sounds like what we did. We would take it over houses and we patrol out of that area, or you take it over and then a platoon comes in, and then they it's like almost leapfrogging. So what was that fighting like? I mean, you guys, there's the tunnels, there's the buildings, the high rises, what was that urban combat? I mean, that's intense stuff.
Intense, but the engagements don't usually last too long. By the time that at that stage, in the beginning, there were bigger squads of Hamas that were operating. At this point, I think the vast majority of their connections, the vast majority of their commanders, like the platoon division level commanders, had been killed. So it felt to me like the further we went on, the more we operated, the more Hamas we took out, the less organized they were, obviously, and the engagements in tandem with that became shorter and shorter. It seemed more of a spray and pray and then run away kind of deal. For the fire that we were receiving over time, I felt like the fire became less and less effective. Occasionally, you would have some pretty accurate and effective fire from snipers, or you would go into essentially an ambush. But it felt like they were getting less and less organized over time. But again, the vast majority, to answer your question, the vast majority of engagements were being shot at for a little bit. Once you determine where it is, you shoot back. A tank shoots. Sometimes the Air Force would come in and deal with it, and either we killed them or they ran away pretty quickly. They're definitely afraid of really having frontal engagements. They're not going to be, very rarely are they going to be coming and attacking the house you're in or the position you're in full on and trying to come in and do face-to-face combat. It doesn't happen. It's usually what we experienced was getting RPG fire, and then in the beginning, and then heavy machine gun fire or AK fire, and then they either run away or we kill them before they can.
Mm-hmm. So what was that like? Did you run into any of the tunnel networks, or what was going on there?
Absolutely. Entrances everywhere. There wasn't a single mosque or school without tunnels or tunnel entrances, exits, whatever you want to call them. Tunnels everywhere. There was, I don't know. We try not to go into them too much. There are special units specifically dedicated to do that. I won't touch on that too much, but they're units that their whole job is to go in and destroy those tunnels. But impressive tunnels, I won't lie. I remember we were in a house for a couple of days, and a tank came, drove by next to us, and the tracks of the tank must have uncovered the entrance to this tunnel because we hadn't seen it before. And we, exit or an entrance to this tunnel kind of 10 meters away from the house that we were staying in for a couple of days. And I went up to the tunnel and I pulled out a grenade and I dropped it in, and I didn't even hear the blast. I think the tunnel was probably 40 meters deep, something like that. Um,
Holy shit.
Reinforced concrete. It looked like some, they're not. It looks like they know how to build a tunnel or two.
I remember seeing some of those videos that, like you said, they were everywhere. And then, Nick, obviously, getting some intelligence from the guys on the ground, was saying, and we saw some videos of it too. Like obviously the Hamas propaganda videos where they were like popping up, like you said, 10 meters away from IDF soldiers and they didn't even know it, or trying to do surprise attacks. Obviously those started to minimize more and more as the operation went on. But yeah, that's it was quite impressive actually, like the amount of digging and, the engineering that went into it, the stuff that we saw in the, over here in the US that was coming out. We're like, holy shit. Like if you put that much effort into tunnels, man, imagine what you could do if you actually built better
Yeah,
infrastructure. Like it
when you
was
get
shocking. Yeah.
billions in foreign aid to supposedly help the citizens of your, not a country, but they call it a country, I guess, so we'll call it a country. Um, when you get billions of dollars in foreign aid from Arab and European countries to supposedly help your people, and instead of helping your own people, you build tunnels. It turns out you can build some nice tunnels.
It was kind of funny. I know you can't touch on it too much, but I remember we were talking about I was on a gig and they're like, yeah, these terror tunnels. I was like, and in my head, I'm like, man, you know what they should do? They should just like fill it with water. And then like no more than 24 hours later, my Dick texts me. He's like, bro, they're going to fill them with water. And I was like, yeah, it's a pretty good tactic. You below the
Yeah,
water
I
level,
won't. I won't
you
touch
know?
on. I won't touch on
Yeah.
that too much. There was a
Yeah. Yeah.
video that came out of supposedly Hamas terrorists being drowned in the tunnels. Um,
Yeah. Yeah. That's what I'm
my
saying. Like,
personal
yeah. Yeah.
opinion that's not based on any facts that I'm aware of. I'm just a regular soldier. I don't get that much information about the overall plan. But my belief is it's more of a it's going to be used more to kind of destroy tunnels that have already been cleared than it is to destroy
Mm-hmm.
tunnels that are found and still need to be cleared. Simply because
Mm-hmm.
of the dangers towards the hostages and so on that could
Mm-hmm.
potentially be in any tunnel.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's it was wild too. I've never seen them blowing the tunnels, and like I said, it's a vast system, and it, like I said, highly impressive. Did you guys see? Was that affecting kind of like the roads, or like was that collapsing some of the roads, like because of how deep they were, or did it, like kind of
No,
sinkhole effect?
so no, they're concrete tunnels. The vast majority of them made out of concrete. Some of them just looks like someone kind of dug in there. But any of the serious ones that are actual real tunnel networks, the bigger parts, it's like an underground complex, and they're built well. Seems like, and as far as I'm aware of, it's not something that's just going to collapse like that. It may happen, but not that I experienced.
Hmm. And so, when you guys would come across and they blow these things, you guys are pretty confident that like, hey, they're not going to use this again, right?
Um, if I've learned anything from the 7th of October, it's dismissing the potential capability of the enemy is more dangerous than anything else you can possibly do.
Hmm.
So, you destroy them now, but you know, it'd be naive to think that every single tunnel can be destroyed and that every single tunnel is gone forever.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. And so, like I said, you guys are moving along, and what was? Did you see any civilians? I know there was obviously calls for evacuation for weeks prior
A lot,
to
a lot of
pushing in.
civilians
You
in
still seeing a
specific
lot?
areas. In specific areas, I won't say which ones um, but there were civilians, not everywhere, only in a couple of the places that I was in. A lot of the places were just kind of a ghost town, an apocalyptical
Hmm.
ghost town, essentially, other than kind of teams of Hamas terrorists running around. But in certain places that we did find civilians that refused to leave. Um, and inside of those civilian kind of inside of those families, um, I'll tell you, I won't tell you where it was or when, but we went into a house. We hear we come to a locked door. We hear voices, and we assume obviously Hamas because we dropped, the Air Force had dropped leaflets saying, "Leave, leave, leave. Otherwise, your family is in danger." So we assumed anyone there would just be terrorists. But we go into that. We decide that we're going to go back at night because we have night vision. They don't. We obviously want that advantage. Um, and so we go in, we kick down the door, and I have the flashlight of my pack on, and the first thing I see is a bunch of kids. And in the back of the room, there's three adults, two men and one woman. Um, and So we took the men to determine whether or not they were terrorists, and the women and children were told to wait until the men were released, and then they'll be able to go. They'll be able to go down through the humanitarian corridor down to the safe zone in southern Gaza. And that happened. We said, you know what, one family, whatever it was, um, the area is supposed to be empty. It's just a couple of people left. It's fine. We go into the next house. Same thing happens. Um, and again, there's two men supposedly in the same family, which doesn't make sense. And all in all, there was something like 300 civilians in this one neighborhood, 300 people, I'll say. And it turns out of those people, there were something like 65 Hamas terrorists that had essentially tried to kind of blend into these families, and you instead of surrendering, their goal was to blend into these families, and then they knew that if they weren't terror, the women, the children, any man that's not Hamas, we're going to release through the humanitarian corridor to go south into the safe zone, and their goal was to try to get through the safe zone with these families while blending in order to avoid being captured or killed by us. But we figured out pretty quickly that it doesn't make sense that there'd be two men in every single one of these families, and so the we I can't say who, but we stopped some high-ranking Hamas members, including terrorists that were involved in the attack on the 7th of October.
What was it like fighting Hamas? And like, I know we're seeing this in, you know, on Western media or like, through Twitter and the information that we're getting, Hamas using civilians basically as shields. Like, what was your experience like that fighting in Gaza? Like, you having Hamas use kids as shields?
Sure. So it's something that we saw a lot, and even more than I was expecting, to be quite honest. Um, we, you know, pardon me. Um, we're always we always see in the media, Hamas uses civilians as human shields, and they build the tunnels under their people, and there's always the political cartoon drawings of Hamas, in their tunnels, and the civilians above it, like the human shield, essentially. But what I saw with my own eyes actually went far beyond what I was expecting. Um, Not only do they use them as literal human shields, they also utilize them as a tactic of war, essentially. So I'll speak about. I won't speak in general terms. I'll speak about the things that I saw. I saw personally, and also things that I've heard from my friends that were also in Gaza, both with me and in other units. Um, so what we experienced quite often was we would be in a building, um, and this would both happen both when we were in attack and both in defense, but usually defense is that um, we would we would see a kid, usually a girl, um, that would have a white flag. and this happened every single time, every time the same tactic. A white flag, and they are sent to run towards us. And essentially, we're left with three options. Number one, because of the threat of potential suicide vests, you shoot the kid. In which case, Hamas will see where you're shooting from. They'll see the muzzle flash, and you will get hit with an RPG. And then Hamas will go and take a photo of the kid and say, "Look what the terrible Israeli oppressive forces have done to this innocent child that didn't do anything wrong." Second scenario is that you shoot in the air or next to them, in order to scare them away and stop them from closing the distance. In which case, Hamas will still see the muzzle flash, and you're going to get an RPG. You're going to get hit by an RPG. The third scenario is that you don't do anything, in which case you're probably going to get an RPG shot at you. Probably not as effective a fire. Usually, the average scenario is probably that they know which building we're in. They're just trying to decide which room to shoot the RPG at, because an RPG takes out a room, usually not a whole building. So your building's probably going to get hit by an RPG, and you're running the risk of the kid getting so close that there's a suicide vest, and that will take out your whole building. So it was something we faced quite often. Our tactic that, the only way that we dealt with it was either by shooting in the air or next to them, or not doing anything. And basically, we learned that the best thing to do in that scenario is, we had a special word for it actually, and whoever was kind of on guard duty, on lookout, would scream and let everyone know, and you would go into a stairwell or somewhere in the building, away from outward facing windows or entrances, so you weren't going to be hit by the RPG. Another thing we saw a lot was use of civilians as a distraction, essentially, where from kind of out of nowhere would essentially just appear a crowd of people, started streaming out of a house or multiple houses, and they would usually kind of not run at us, but move towards us. Usually it'd be more women and children than elderly. And then from the other direction, you would start getting hit by fire of some sort, either RPG or small arms fire, RPK, AK fire. So that was what we saw a lot. And one of the more shocking things that we saw is, to preface this, I'll state that unless they're, when Hamas terrorists were moving around, usually they're not going to be armed. They have weapon caches that they keep in buildings, and they move between those buildings without weapons, because they know that our rules of engagement are not to shoot people without weapons, unless we're 100% sure that they're Hamas. And so we were getting effective fire for a couple of days already from a mosque in the city of Jabalia, and on our position. And there was a lot of people we were seeing around there, and I was on scout duty, whatever you would call it. Essentially, I'm the one at the top of the building or somewhere in the building that's looking out and on guard duty. And I see a man, military-aged male, with a bunch of kids surrounding him, and walking between house to house, moving quickly. And the kids were kind of, I think there were 4 of them, and they were on all sides of him, and he's looking at our direction, and then looking away, looking at our direction. He knew we were there, and it was pretty clear to me that he was just using these kids as human shields. So while they always said, we always see in the news and so on, they're using their own people as human shields, it's not something I imagined I'd ever see with my own eyes.
Yeah, it's something like you think that like, oh, it's one or two incidents or something like that, but then you see it as a full blown tactic.
It's a
Set guys
systematic
moving building to
tactic
building.
that they use. Systematic tactic that they use. We ran into it on so many occasions that it's not. There's no way in my mind that that's not something that they're taught to do, or at least something that's kind of ingrained in their what we call the kind of their book of warfare. What the way that the way that they fight.
Mm-hmm. So I know we were just talking about your buddy with the baby. Can you tell that story?
Sure. So, a good friend of mine, uh, he is a sniper in a um, special forces reserves unit, and he was the mission was that they were to gain control over this building. Um, I'll say it was a public infrastructure building. I won't say what it was exactly, but essentially, Hamas had a bunch of people in there, both civilians and Hamas. And the Hamas that were inside, the Hamas operatives that were inside, knew very, very well that the IDF was outside, and they clearly knew that there were snipers looking at them. And they lined civilians at the entrances. And my friend explained to me in great detail, which I won't go into here, that essentially he saw through the window a what seemed like a commander of some sort, given it seemed like he was the one giving out orders and organizing things. He saw them take a baby and come to the window or door entrance rather, and lift the baby up and show the baby. And he clearly, again, for the purpose of showing it to the IDF soldiers that he knew were looking, and raised a gun to its head. And my friend said that he could kind of see in the back of the room from the entrance that he could see through, that there was a woman that was freaking out and crying. And that same person, that same terrorist, again, was clearly the one organizing things, and so that was the target that my friend was given. That the shot that he needed to take was to take out this guy, and he was peeking in and out of the door frame, and he knew very well that he had IDF zeroed in on him, and my friend told me that he was sitting in his sniper's nest, and they were high level commanders that had come from a bunch of different units, and the commander of his unit that were sitting basically on his shoulder, bitching at him. You need to take this guy out. You need to take this guy out. And he didn't have a clean shot. And they were just telling him, take the shot. And he waited over 2 hours, and eventually he got a clean shot. The guy stood in front of the doorway for like 1 second, and my friend took the shot and was able to take him out. So, yeah, to me, based on my experience, both my own experiences, as well as friends of mine that obviously we exchange stories of our experiences in Gaza. It seems like there's systematic use of civilians as a tactic of warfare by Hamas.
Yeah, it's a pretty shitty tactic. Obviously with Hamas and we're talking about warfare, and I it's pretty ridiculous. I think after fighting 2 wars myself, and you're seeing what's going on with Ukraine, and you're seeing what's going on in the fall of Afghanistan. Like the Afghans are, the Taliban is bringing in every swinging dick group into Afghanistan. It's a fight that we're going to have to fight again. And I think that's something that's a little bit lost on the Western world. I think the counterinsurgency sometimes is a easy out for politicians or for people to easily stomach. And I feel like total war is something that needs to be more as a primary and not a secondary. And counterinsurgency needs to take kind of a backseat, because when you're fighting a war, you need to fight the war, and you need to win. and you need to keep going until everyone, people say mercy and they sign an agreement. And if they violate that agreement, then you throw a rocket up their ass again. I think that's something that has been lost. I think winning hearts and minds is a good idea, but I also think that should be secondary to what's going on. Your government or the people that are ruling over you, they fucked up and they fucked up big, and now it's time to pay the price. You're seeing in Ukraine, and it's like people can't wrap their heads around like the Russian tactics. I mean, they've lost over 300,000 soldiers fighting in Ukraine, and they do not care about their own soldiers' lives. Not saying that you don't care about your own soldiers' lives, but the Ukrainians are fighting for everything they got. And sometimes the West just doesn't understand, well, why don't we just try to talk with them? Well, what's Russia doing so bad? It's like the Russians are leveling cities left and right. Like they don't understand the threat that basically Putin's willing to go invade other countries. And if you aren't strong enough to stand up to it, he's going to run you over, and they're going to wipe your everything off the map with no mercy, and they don't care. And I think what you saw with Hamas with this whole, 1,200 Israelis died. Well, why don't we just do the equal amount? Like, why does the Israelis have to go in, and start basically leveling Gaza? It's like, well, because you have to take care of the fucking problem. And you can speak better to that. It's, what's your take on that?
My take is that, particularly in Western society, there's a fetishization of quote unquote fairness. And the reality of it is that in war, there's no such thing as fair. And if all was equal in the world and all was fair, and if settling the score had to be done in a fair way, and if protecting your people and the action that Israel would have taken would have been fair and an equal and proportionate response, what would the world like us to do? Would they like for us to do to Gaza exactly what they did to us? What does that look like? Does that look like me and my team and other Israeli soldiers going into Gaza and raping and slaughtering innocent civilians at parties and sleeping in their homes? What does that look like? Would that be fair if we went into Gaza and raped and slaughtered innocent people, mutilated their bodies, and kidnapped them back to their bodies, back to Israel? Would that be an acceptable response? Not only is that not an acceptable response, it's not something that any Israeli is willing to do. So when we're talking about armed conflict and war, I think that this idea of fairness, you only really see it in the West. You don't see anyone in the Middle East talking about it because no one cares, and you don't see it in the East either. But I think it stems from this kind of modern day cultural values, particularly that exist in the West, particularly in the United States, where peace upon all the world, and why do we have to invade? Why do we have to do this? Why do you have to kill people? Why do you have to invade Gaza? Well, the other option is that we don't do anything and we continue to be murdered and slaughtered in our homes and get thousands of rockets launched at us a year. And if we don't remove the existential threats that exist to our country, they're not going to remove themselves. And I think that this fetishization of fairness and lack of understanding of why we are doing what we are doing is a product of the vast majority of the West's privilege, of not understanding or not knowing what it feels like to hear an air raid siren, knowing that missiles are headed towards your country and your house, and the only thing standing between you and that is an Iron Dome system that's accurate 95% of the time, right? So when we talk about fair, what is really fair? What does that look like? And I think that, again, this is something we discussed earlier, is that if everything was just tit for tat and an eye for an eye, and the situation would never end. Where does it stop, right? If you don't remove the problem entirely, if you only do half measures, what will end up happening is in Gaza is exactly what happened in Afghanistan, which is the problem wasn't entirely removed, and the change of guard wasn't done carefully and wasn't done properly, and you end up with the problem returning, and more people are going to die, and more resources, most importantly, people will die, but also resources, and to what end? If you don't remove the problem entirely, it is going to grow back again. And the same thing that happened on the 7th of October will happen in another 17 years if that change of guard between Hamas, the removal of Hamas from power, and whatever power, government or organization that fills that vacuum, that space, if that's not done properly, and there's not a fundamental change in the fabric of Palestinian society, Gazan society, in which the killing of Jews is no longer, if it continues to be idolized and ingrained into society, a different group with the same intentions under a different name will come, and the same situation will happen, and more people will die, and we'll end up in the exact same situation that we are today. And I think that to kind of there are two sayings to sum it up. One, if Israel put down their weapons today, if we put down our weapons today, tomorrow there would be no Israel. And if the Palestinians put down their weapons, there would be peace.
That's a good take, and I've heard that too as well, and I agree with you. I think that's something that the West, it's soft and cushy here, and that's definitely affected a lot of policies. And we were talking earlier before, especially with World War II, like you have to end it, and you have to end it violently, and you have to say no more. Like, this stops now. If you do it again, it's going to be bad. It's going to be really fucking bad. And everyone tries to talk now about the morality of the atomic bomb. It's like there was no issue doing that back then, and everyone agreed upon it. I mean, and I still agree upon it. I was like, absolutely. I mean, you weren't going to stop that nation. Japan was absolutely psychotic. Like, you thought, I mean, the Germans were obviously horrific, but you look at the Japan, man, like the rape of Nanking, the rape of Manila, like what they were doing to the Chinese, it was insane. And the fighting too, for the Marines and the Army that were fighting island to island, the island hopping campaign was horrifically brutal. And to take on Japan and to say, we're going to lose 1 million Marines and soldiers so we can take the island Japan, like, yeah, the atomic bombs were worth it. It saved our lives and it ended the war. So that's what you have to do. Like, these extreme measures have to be taken so that you do not have a war. It's been a solid 80 years and they haven't had a peep. Germany and Japan hasn't said shit in 80 years. That's a pretty good fucking sign of what the tactics were back in 1940s. So, I agree with you. I think it's just one of those things where it's hard to do, but doing the right thing is hard. And in warfare, it's just like when you water it down, it just delays the inevitable, which is you're going to be back to fighting. If you do these half measures, you're going to keep fighting. You're going to keep going back to the same watering hole because you didn't stomp it out. I liked your analogy you said before about the how do most forest fires start? If you want to say that analogy, I think that was great.
Sure. So how do most forest fires start? It's a campfire, a bunch of people sitting around a campfire, and they pour some water, or they cover the embers with some dirt. But there's one little ember left, and out of that one ember, if that's left to keep on burning, eventually it'll reignite the other embers, and those embers will reignite more embers, and that's how you end up with a forest fire. And all it would have taken is just a little bit more water, or a little bit more dirt to put out that one last ember, and you wouldn't have ended up with the forest fire. And I see that happening in a bunch of conflicts around the world. And I think it is kind of a direct result of current Western ideology of, well, everything's got to be fair, and you can't do that. It's not nice, and it's not fair, and it's too much. And again, where does it end? Would you rather deal with it once and deal with it properly and ensure peace and safety in the future, or would you rather conduct a half measure and then that those embers that you left burning reignite, and you have to deal with the problem all the way from the beginning again?
What's the general feeling like of the civilians? You know what I mean? Like, what's the, you guys are duking it out. What do the civilians, how do the civilians feel? Because I feel like you guys know probably the best of what the atmospherics on the ground is. The way that, we look at it from the West, it's really, we imagine it's tough, but it's also harder when you have 75% or 60% of the Palestinians like back Hamas. Hamas is tech, quote unquote, the government. It starts to get really hard to distinguish who you're fighting, and you know what I mean? Like, if that makes sense, like this isn't like
Absolutely.
a fringe group of like 200 people that are just running amok. This is like, it's almost like you're fighting, quote unquote, another country or another country's government. So why is it not, you know what I mean? Like, this doesn't sound like a counterinsurgency operation. It sounds more like a battle that against another country. And, can you kind of give your opinion on that, or give your thoughts, or what the civilians on the ground are feeling? Because, it's like, it just doesn't, sometimes it just doesn't make sense to us in the West, where you're like I said, these aren't like small pockets, and the people that are controlled by their government, it's their government. This isn't some gang. Can you kind of shed some light on that?
Sure. So to tell you that I fully understand the inner workings of so-called Palestinian society, I don't. I probably have a better understanding than most. So I'll give you my perspective, which is that before I'm a soldier, an IDF soldier, before I'm anything else, I'm a human being, and that the people that I came across in Gaza, um, other than Hamas, are also human beings, and they deserve to be treated with dignity and respect, just like I would want to be treated. And just because they were born in a different country and born in that area, and they speak a different language than me, it doesn't mean that they're any less of a human being than I am. So every interaction that I ever had in my military service, including my experience dealing with civilians in Gaza, was treating them how I'd want to be treated if I was in their situation. And obviously, there are steps that have to be taken in order to ensure my safety and the safety of my team members. But but my opinion is that before I'm a human being, before I'm a soldier, I'm a human being, and that these people deserve to be treated with dignity and respect, just like I would want to be. So I, you know, um, it's that being said, it's incredibly difficult. It's incredibly difficult to operate in a military setting, knowing that there's civilians around, and while I don't want to hurt innocent people, right? Um, that's my take on it. It seems to me that among Gazans, they feel entirely, I won't say all of them, but I've also seen a lot of videos come out of Gazans essentially protesting in the streets, groups of young men and people screaming, Sinwar, you coward, look what you've done to us, and you've destroyed our country, you've destroyed our homes, you've ruined everything. I don't know if all of them are like that, but lately I've been seeing a lot more videos coming out that seems like, a lot of Gazans realize that it's Hamas's fault, and that Gaza will never be the same. Not only is a lot of Gaza rubble, it's worse than everything being wiped out, because not only do they have to rebuild, they have to also get rid of all of the ruins, and which kind of, it's difficult enough to build cities, but when you have to essentially excavate the remains of a city and then rebuild it, probably doubles the amount of time it would take. So to me, it seems like they, you know, a good portion of them, I don't know about a good portion, they're Gazans that hate Hamas and feel entirely betrayed by their quote unquote government, and that Hamas is hiding in these tunnels where the airstrikes can't get to them, or most of them, and the people of Gaza are left to fend for themselves. Hamas has been, this is not just my opinion. This is kind of fact, that as soon as the humanitarian aid that Israel's putting into Gaza gets in, Hamas takes it and they put it into their tunnels. And I found in Hamas strongholds, in clearly Hamas operative houses, bags of so-called humanitarian aid. And yeah, I look. I feel bad for them, but I feel bad for the people of Gaza. But I think it's an unfortunate reality of war. The unfortunate reality of war is that sometimes civilians get injured and killed, and it's a terrible, terrible thing. But it's essentially unfortunately, it's kind of unavoidable. It's impossible to do what we need to do, and without civilian casualty, unfortunately, as does any war. But if you look at the numbers, it's one of the lowest combatant to civilian casualty ratios in the history of modern warfare. So it's hard to kind of, I want to say I take pride in that, in being part of that effort, but at the same time, it's, I believe that any loss of civilian life is a tragedy. So, I can say that I'm proud of that fact, but it's hard to say that, I'm proud of that 1 to 2.5 ratio, or 1 to 2 ratio, or whatever it is. I'm proud of the 1, which is the combatant, which is the Hamas terrorist. I'm proud of that part of the ratio. Even though I think we go to pretty great lengths to safeguard and avoid civilian casualty, I can't say that I'm proud of any civilian casualty that happens, as unavoidable as it may be.
So what for the situation on the ground then, it's going to be tough. I mean, you're still fighting, but it's that, like I said, that rebuilding aspect. But when you look at, like I said, Israel's got a tough road ahead. I think everybody does, even the Palestinians, on what route do you take now? Because, all the reports are coming out, and it's things that people already knew. Like the UNRW was a joke, and it was pretty big anti-Jewish Israeli, basically schools and propaganda. And you can't let that fester again, because you get the result of what happens. So, but I imagine obviously Palestinians and the Gazans are pissed as well, because, everything's leveled. But at the same time, like, they have to be like, we have to accept, I don't want to say, hey, you got to live together, trying to rebuild after this war. I imagine it's going to be tough, but at the same time, it's necessary that they kind of accept it. Like, hey man, like, we're going to have to be here because you guys went fucking buck wild, and your leaders suck. So you got to stick up for yourself, or something's got to give. So what's that kind of that sentiment on ground in Israel right now? Like, we basically kind of have to help them rebuild, even though they did this stuff, to make
We
sure
just
we
want to
don't
be
go
left
through
the
this
fuck
again.
alone. We just want to be left the fuck alone. Obviously, I think we'll partake in some of the efforts of rebuilding Gaza, but honestly, we're sick of war. We're sick of
Yeah.
dying. I don't want Palestinians to die. I don't want Israelis to die. I don't want to die. I don't want to go to war. Um,
Hmm.
they'll have to rebuild. They'll have to. I don't know who's going to be in charge of that. It's not going to be Hamas. I can tell you that much for sure. Over my dead
Yeah.
body. Um,
Yeah.
but there'll have to be a real rebuilding effort there, and I hope that it's different this time. It's history repeats itself, unfortunately. To tell you that I have incredibly high hopes for the future of Gaza, not so much.
Hmm.
But my hope and my prayer is that over the I don't think it's possible for it to be an immediate change, but my hope and prayer is that in the near future that Palestinians as a whole are able to take steps within their society to move towards peace. Israelis don't want war. We want
Hmm.
the right to self-determinate in our ancestral homeland, and we want to be left the fuck alone. Um, so hopefully they're able to kind of build that same sentiment and ingrain that into their society. Um, but however that moves, for there's talks of what's going to happen in Gaza in terms of maybe the Egyptians will take over. The Egyptians will never fucking take over. Egypt doesn't want anything to do with it. Egypt has enough of its own problems that they don't want to now take on their problems plus Gaza's problems.
Hmm.
Talks about the Palestinian Authority from the West Bank, and the PLO taking over and taking responsibility out of Gaza again over my dead fucking body. You know what I mean? It's they have a
Yeah.
system. It's called pay for slay, where the families of terrorists that go and commit terrorist attacks and kill Jews, they get a pension essentially for the rest of their lives, and so do their families. I I think that in order for there to be any kind of hope for peace in the future, that there needs to be a fundamental change in the fabric of Palestinian society, that their whole identity, national identity, is built around this theory of them being oppressed, and their so-called how do I say it? Their so-called not rebellion, like resistance.
Hmm.
Um, and if it continues that way, to tell you that the same thing won't happen again in 10, 20, 30 years, I can't tell you that it won't happen. You know what I mean? So,
Hmm.
um, in terms of a hope for a better future, hopefully, Saudi or someone is able to come in and take over, and they're able to build a better future and invest into civilian infrastructure as opposed to terrorist infrastructure, in disguise of civilian infrastructure, and they're able to make long lasting change and create a essentially a state for the people of Gaza, and that they're able to be self-sustaining and have their right to self-determination and to live freely and peacefully. That's my hope. In
Hmm.
reality, if Hamas isn't completely destroyed and the change of guard essentially isn't carefully watched over and conducted in the right way, I think that the potential for there to be a similar situation to what happened in Afghanistan, where supposedly, the Taliban was gone, we killed them all, and not killed them all, but they were kind of pushed back into the deep dark corners of Afghanistan, and then look at what happened now.
Hmm.
They're in control of the country. So my hope is that something similar doesn't happen. My hope
Yeah.
is that it, you know, is that when we leave Gaza eventually, that whatever whatever form of government that fills that vacuum, whatever form of power or control, whoever fills that vacuum, whatever group that may be, doesn't do the exact same thing Hamas did and end up with the exact same situation another 17 years from now. That's
Yeah.
that's my hope. And
Okay.
if it's not done properly, my belief is that the same thing that happened will happen again.
Well, shit, man, that was a great talk. Thanks for coming on. That's a good note to end on. Where can I guess we're holding your identity, so not where people can find you, but thanks for coming on and sharing your story about fighting in Gaza and kind of what's going on in Israel right now and whatnot. It was great having you on.
Thanks so much for having me. I greatly appreciate the opportunity to speak about my experiences, and it was really great. I appreciate your time.
Awesome. Well, thanks for coming on, brother. Stay safe.
You as well. Take care.